I was searching for the parents of my second great-grandfather, Thomas H., and while searching through the records, I came across something unexpected. Multiple children with the H surname appeared as servants in different households across the same small region in the mid-1800s, and Thomas was one of them.
In my last video, I followed Margaret, the next H servant child I found after Thomas, and built a strong case linking her to a later family connection supported by DNA matches. Then I switched focus onto two other H servant children, George and Jane, to see if the records could tell me whether they were siblings to Thomas H. Let's take a look at what I found. In the 1861 Canadian Census, I found a 13-year-old Jane H. working as a servant for Richard Smith in Hampton, New Brunswick. I searched for George, but I couldn't find him in that record. Moving on to 1871, I found Jane H. working as a servant for Guilford Cougal and his wife in Sussex Parish. In the same census record, I also found George working as a laborer and still living with an 82-year-old Susanna Smith and a 40-year-old Ebenezer Smith as head of household. Apparently, by this point, the elder Ebenezer Smith had passed away. I then searched for George separately and found a tombstone for him at St. Paul Anglican Church Cemetery. He died at age 43. Knowing that he died in 1886, I then checked the 1881 census. At first, I couldn't find him, but after trying alternate spellings, I found him listed with an extra letter at the end of his name. In that record, George is living with Ebenezer Smith Jr. and his wife. Since I had already located Jane in 1861, I went back to that census and found her again. Flipping back one page, I also found George, age 16, living with Ebenezer, his wife Susan, and their children, including a son named Ebenezer. George's surname is misspelled in this record, which likely explains why I missed him at first. At this point, I began to wonder if George and Jane might be connected to the Smith families in some way. Jane appears in Richard Smith's household, and George remains with Ebenezer Smith household network across multiple records. So I looked into Richard and Ebenezer Smith, and the records suggest they were cousins. This doesn't prove a biological relationship to the H children, but it does suggest they were part of a connected local family network where orphan children may have been placed. I tried searching the 1851 census again for both George and Jane, but didn't find them at first. So I searched specifically for Richard Smith and then Ebenezer. Jane was not in Richard's household in that census, but in Ebenezer Smith's household, I found a 10-year-old George listed as a servant with no surname recorded. Something interesting I noticed is the naming patterns. George died in 1886, and my second great-grandfather, Thomas H., had a son the following year whom he named George. That child unfortunately died a few weeks later. I also noticed that Thomas named a daughter Sarah Jane, and Margaret H. named one of her daughters Mary Jane. In the records, Mary Jane is often found as just Jane or Jenny. Margaret also had a son she named Thomas. Whether this is a coincidence or a naming pattern linked to earlier family connection is something I cannot prove, but it is an interesting theory. What I do know from the records is that there were 4 children with the H surname working as servants for prominent families in neighboring New Brunswick parishes in the mid-1800s. Their ages are separated by only a few years, which is consistent with siblings. And 2 of them, Jane and George, appear within the household of the Smith family network, suggesting they may have been placed with an extended family network after the loss or separation from their parents. I also have reason to believe George never married and remained with the Ebenezer Smith's family until his death.
As for Jane, she disappears after 1871. But since I found DNA matches that connect to Margaret H. under her married surname, it is possible that Jane married and she is hidden within the records under a married surname. She could also be potentially represented among my DNA matches under this surname as well. This is a line of research to be explored further. Another interesting point is that I have multiple DNA matches that I have not been able to fully explain. These matches match my direct Thomas H line. They're direct lines of descendants from his other children, and also across the Margaret H DNA match group. So in other words, the same set of matches show up across multiple branches that descend from Thomas and Margaret H, but I have not been able to determine how they intersect within the tree. These matches raise more questions than answers. So while this video focused on George, Jane, and the other H children, these matches may help me determine the identity of Thomas H's parents. They may also be helpful in clarifying whether or not the H servant children came from the same family group. These matches is what I'll be looking at next. So what do you think? Do you think that the H servant children were siblings? Does the evidence add up? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and as always, have a great day.